We'll go to the back. Kathy, you want to go next?
Sure. Kathy, Chief Financial Officer.
Chief Executive Relations Officer.
Shannon Stevens, Community Engagement.
Damon Reishi, Planning and Development Services Division Manager.
Christy Reedy, Government Relations Manager. Jamie Welsh, Culture and Development Leader.
Peter Shower, Research and Innovation Manager.
Executive Assistant.
Joshua Bernier, Senior IT Tech.
Head online and go Rebecca first.
Can you hear me okay? Rebecca Shell, Zone 1.
Sherilyn.
Hi, Sherilyn Labo, City Manager in Tualatin, non-voting rep for the cities, and I apologize for being virtual again. I would much rather be there with you all, but anyway, I had a little bit of a crisis here, so I'm calling in.
Great. On that, let's open our first order of business. Damon and members of the CWAC subcommittee will report back to the commission on the first subcommittee meeting. The stormwater.
Hi, everybody. I told the rest of the subcommittee that I would go ahead and present the report tonight. I encourage them to pop in if I miss anything important, and I'm thankful that Damon is here to fill in the gaps, because it's a bit of a complex subject for me at this point in the game anyway. We had our first meeting late last month. And oh yes, Damon is putting up slides for me. Thank you. Yeah, it was March 30th. We met. Members of the committee include subcommittee include Rebecca, Greg, Stu. I don't think I forgot anybody. Was it 4 of us?
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, there's
No.
5.
Yeah.
Terry.
Terry saw it, of course, and Terry attended as well. Yeah. Okay. All right, let's go to the next slide. So this process needs to be wrapped up by November 1st. And so I just wanted to put the time frame here. There's an internal technical working group within Clean Water Services working on these standards. These are stormwater revisions for water quality treatment. Our CWAC subcommittee met in March. We're gonna likely meet again in May, and then in June, our CWAC meeting will be the stakeholder forum for people to weigh in on them. Let's look at the next one. Okay, so these are the items that we reviewed at the meeting. Looking at the permit requirements and what the standards are and what they need to change. Looking at rainfall analysis and choosing a design storm. The design storm is the storm that the standards will be based on, or will be developed to treat. And they're also going to be looking at retention and treatment facility sizing. And there will be some feasibility criteria to review. But anyway, we will be getting to that in future meetings. This first meeting really was trying to bring us all up to speed on looking at the design storm and what the benchmark needed to be for that work. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so the permit requires stormwater retention, infiltration, water quality treatment. It's prioritized by permit. We have to prioritize green infrastructure. And then at the bottom there, when it's really not feasible to do something on site, for example, sometimes a transit-oriented development or other kind of facility, there wouldn't be an opportunity for on-site treatment. And so there is fee in lieu potential. One of the things we will be looking at are the infeasibility criteria, where people would be allowed to do a fee in lieu. And we haven't got to that yet in the process. Next. So this has to be done, I mentioned earlier, by November 1st. So we are at those first three bullets are kind of what we talked about. The second bullet more briefly, but the water quality and the infiltration and the design storm was the focus of the first meeting. Let's go to the next one. Okay. Oh, we don't have our diagram. Okay, that's all right. That's all right. It was a different visual to convey the same information.
We could probably get it real quick if you like.
I think we're fine.
Slide before.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can bring it up, go ahead. And I'll just,
It's the slide
It's
right after that.
in
one.
between
Right
here. Yeah. As to unhide, don't share.
You have to break out of, yeah, so actually I can get to it right there.
There, that's the one.
A little bit small. If you unhide it, then we can make it big
Okay.
again. Right click and do unhide. I'll do that. It's okay, I'll get back there.
There we are. This is the same information in a different way. We're really not looking at hydro modification and the things that are in the blue box right now. We're focused on for water quality. The first preferred option is to retain and infiltrate the water. If it's infeasible, do water quality treatment. If that's infeasible, go to a benefit offset, which Damon will have to tell you what that is because
That's basically the fee of what.
the fee in lieu. Okay, and then you see the green box on the left, green infrastructure is the priority and the first choice. And so this is what we're talking about with the green infrastructure here, really talking about these things are called planters and rain gardens in the lexicon of this work. And so this is really what they're trying to size and create standards for to do water quality treatment. Okay, next. And then that's about all I have to say about that. I'm still, and I'll just fess up very, very readily that I'm still on this. I feel far from expert. We're going to meet again in May. We're going to talk about infeasible criteria, and we're going to talk about how to the stakeholder forum in June. I think one other thing I do want to mention, and I don't think Stu is on, but Drake can help fill in. One thing that Stu shared was that from his perspective as a developer, some of his biggest concerns were around the speed of response to permit applications and the clarity of the standards. And so that's something that was beyond the scope of what we were going to talk about at the first meeting, but it's something that we're going to be mindful of and watching for in the initial draft and subsequent conversations.
We'll probably be pulling a group out of just technical engineers on the private side to talk about what the net outcome will look like. So that we know more what it's really gonna be at finish instead, because right now it feels very high in the sky.
I think also that brings up a really good point, Drake. We talked about having, different stakeholder meetings, and I believe Clean Water Services is already looking at environmental stewards and at business people. And
So definitely heard three groups that the stakeholder or the subcommittee suggested that we engage with, and that was the development community, with maybe HBA sponsoring a meeting where we could get engineers together. An environmental group that maybe riverkeepers could help with pulling group together. And then also Terry brought up that it would be really good to connect with transportation engineers and speak with them. And also had some discussions with Washington County's LUT Capital Group about helping with figuring that out. So that we're going to do some targeted engagement related to those areas.
And so then the June meeting that we will host as CWAC is going to be broader public that is not captured in these other groups, but still has interest.
Question. Drake, have you heard anything from the development community? Any concerns about these infiltration areas adjacent to sidewalks?
The existing ones today,
Yeah, I think, yeah, you know, the purpose of it's great and all of that, but it looks to me like it could be a hazard. Skateboards,
I don't-
bicycles, wheelchairs, you know, does it like an HOA have any liability there?
now, I don't know about HOA liability. I know the biggest concern usually is the loss of land and the cost of the building of the infrastructure. So when you have to build those, they have concrete, they have a lot more that's involved in those, especially when, well, the other pieces are not much. I know, and with Portland, you lose parking, you know, where they've really gotten into every neighborhood. For the technical teams that work with builders, developers, I don't think it's as big. It's for them, it's just a matter of almost math, right? How big does it have to be? How much room is it gonna take? What's it gotta be made out of? There's the policy decision of safety, it goes beyond. And I will tell you personally, I think a lot of builders and developers look at those on site and go, I can't believe I just had to build that thing that somebody's gonna fall into.
And another question, the fee in lieu of doing that, does that go just to being at a little larger infrastructure for that? Or does it go to purchasing mitigation land in like a
It goes towards, well, it goes towards water quality, or in case of hydromodification, water quantity mitigation. So it's taking untreated impervious area, and building some sort of facility to treat that. 90% or more of the impervious area in Washington County was built before there was any sort of requirements. So there's lots of impervious area out there that doesn't have treatment. So it's basically doing a retrofit of those areas.
One question about the stakeholder forums, are those intended, the other ones before June 10th? Will ours be the final?
I mean, that would be ideal. Whether or not we can get it on everyone's schedule before then, maybe not. So I think we're open to trying, but if we can't, that's okay too. We likely will have a draft in a few weeks that we can share with the public. That may help with people understanding and getting a sense. That's a early public draft. It's informal. So will probably be another iteration of that before we get to what's more of a formal draft that then goes to the board and has an opportunity for formal comment. So we're trying to build opportunities to talk with the public, get a lot of informal feedback, go through some iterations before we have that formal process.
Make a suggestion. Take on the farm. That you guys are really targeted. Just to participate. I also recommend or suggest having them, giving them a way to provide that input around a tech or
Good point.
So the, I don't know if this entirely answers your question or it's what you were thinking, but what we're doing is we've got an email list that we went out to all the contacts we thought were likely interest that we knew of from our databases. And we've got a web page set up, that sort of drives everybody from that contact to that web page, and it tells you about what's happening with the revision process. When we get to a draft, there'll be a notice that goes out to all those folks, and anybody can sign up through the web page to get that notification. That draft will go out. It'll be a red line version that people can see what's changed. We'll probably have a clean version too, just for easier readability. And then there's a comment form that we'll have available that folks can provide comments, they can provide edits, send that back to us, and we'll track all of that, try to respond to all of it. Whether that response is make a change or say why we can't make a change, or we need more information, we'll try to acknowledge all of those comments and make some sort of response. So that's what we're planning for, allowing everyone, stakeholders, to provide input, in addition to things like the forum. Thanks.
Any other questions in the room?
Damon, the West Side Economic Alliance and the Washington County Chamber both have land use and housing committees. From the business perspective, I'm wondering if those are two groups, and they have monthly meetings, those committees. I wonder if this is something that would be good for feedback in those forums.
I'd be happy. Don't have anything scheduled with them or lined up for that right now. In the past, we have done Chamber of Commerce's, so it would be unusual to do that. Be happy to do that kind of presentation.
Yeah, I'd recommend those two.
WEA, their committees are kind of where the action is now, and they're always looking for ideas like this, and we could probably get on their calendar pretty quickly.
And that might be well timed shortly following a draft release is what I'm thinking. I don't know if you have a thought about that before a draft, after a draft.
It depends how comfortable you feel communicating the intended or possible changes in a draft form. I think the earlier the better, probably, for those committees.
Sure. Similarly, I would suggest if we jump in, if we help put together a group of environmental or ecological organizations, we would love to do it at the same time. Not the exact same time, but the same part of the process. So okay, let's connect on that and maybe after also those together. Great. Other comments or questions? Thank you. And next on our agenda, Tracy Rainey will share highlights and outcomes relevant to clean water services from the relatively recently completed state legislative session, which adjourned March 6th.
See you all. Thank you. And again, I'm Tracy Rainey, Government Relations Manager for Clean Water Services. I'm happy to be here tonight to share with you an update on our federal and state legislative agendas and a bit more of a focus on the state legislative agenda from the recently adjourned session, as you just mentioned, which has been about a month, but still feels like it was just yesterday. So tonight I'll talk through the state legislative session, just give a very brief overview of some of the items that we were working on. And how those relate to some of the principles and priorities that you all heard about when I presented to you just ahead of the legislative session. We'll talk quickly on some of the emergent state policy issues that have recently come up. And then switch over to federal legislative update. Spending a bit of time on, as always, Scoggins update. There's always something new to share in that space. So as you likely know, state legislative session adjourned March 6th. It was a short legislative session, being that we are in a even numbered year, so not to exceed 35 days. So we were 2 whole days prior to the constitutionally required adjournment date of March 8th. Total number of bills that were introduced for the session was just over 300. So again, being a short legislative session, legislators were limited in the number of bills that they could introduce, which is nice to have, considering the long legislative sessions have gotten a little bit aggressive in terms of the quantity of bills. So a much smaller, list of bills that we had to go through. The total number of bills that we were tracking was just close to 100 out of those 300, which actually is almost a third of the bills. I will note that a lot of those were due to the relating to clause. So bills that were related to housing, we were going to track those. Anything related to environmental issues, we we're going to track those. So about 30 of the bills you'll see there were bills that we had a greater level of review or engagement advocacy on. So pretty reasonable overall for a session. As always, we relied on the good partnerships that we have with other associations and groups, including Special Districts Association of Oregon. They're tracking kind of the wide variety of bills ranging from public records, public meetings laws, ethics, and we lean on them a lot, as well as League of Oregon Cities. The Oregon Association of Clean Water Agencies, also known as ACWA, we work closely with. I continue to be their legislative chair. So they do weekly meetings to go over bills that have a water quality related impact. We worked with the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure this session, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then always working closely with Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. Informational only, they're not advocating, but we do touch base with them. So as you may recall, we have a state guiding principle. This is something that our board adopts as part of our legislative agenda every year. This is the broader item that helps guide us as we're reviewing legislation and determining which legislation that we will engage in and what that position may be for clean water services. You will likely also recall that we had more specific state legislative priorities that were adopted by our board back in December. And the way that I have structured this is to remind you of the priorities and then talk about some of the bills that are relevant within those priorities. So our first one, which is an ongoing item of priority for us, is around infrastructure investment. Going into the legislative session, we knew it was a very tough budget time for the state, as everyone is probably quite aware. So we were really looking at protecting what is existing. We weren't coming to session thinking that we were going to get any real additional investments, but really trying to make sure that we didn't see any extensive cuts to those programs that are really critical for infrastructure. I will note, however, that the septic loan program was one thing that we were advocating in support of. It did not receive funding this legislative session, which was a disappointment. That funding also was not approved at the very end of the last legislative session from 2025. It was anticipated or hoped to be in the final budget bill and was not included. And again, did not make it through the session. So still connecting with DEQ about what the fate of that program is. It was first established in 2016, I believe, and has been an ongoing program to help low-income individuals, households with repair replacement of failing septic systems or connection to public sewer if it's available. So it's been a really, really good program. So pretty sad to see that that is not continuing. Yes.
There's some kind of an assessment in terms of the alternatives of what's the impact of being able to fund it.
So I didn't catch the very end of that. If there's
So is there an alternative to own funding? So
Yeah.
assuming that you won't find an alternative, there's some kind of a assessment of what the impact.
Yeah, there's no specific program like it. So I will say that. I have not given up hope that we might not be able to re-up that program. We'll continue to have a conversation with legislators, but no, it really just very honestly, it leaves, I think, homeowners in a bind. If they have a failing system, I don't think there's a lot of really good low interest options out there for them to address a failing septic system with anything, that's existing in the state right now. So it's a gap for sure.
Not like the families who dump all their sewage into some. To pay maybe.
Yeah. Sorry, Elizabeth.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, if someone has a failing septic system, I mean, it can, and they're not able to repair it or hook up to a public system, it may mean that they're not able to reside in it. It has real implications because it creates public health.
Yeah.
And that program can exist as a shell without funding, which is what we're seeing now. And then folks like Tracy can go out and advocate to re-up funding for it, but the longer that it goes vacant, the harder it can be. You like to have momentum, both because people know that it's there, programs refer people to get the assistance, and it's just harder if it's been zeroed out to bring it back.
So we'll keep at it. Yeah, it'll be a conversation for the interim and going into the next session. So not ready to get that one yet. I will say it's been challenging. I think some of the groups that have been historically at the table and really strongly advocating. I think in the environment that we're seeing right now in the state legislative session, people have to pick their highest priorities. And so you start to see these things that are really important to them, but may not land as like the highest priorities, are getting the same level of advocacy and attention that they did when they were initially created, established.
The number, what's the ask every biennium?
For this one, it was $2 million. Yeah, it is not a significant investment. Actually, the entity that is kind of the third-party community development financial institute that is administering the loans right now, it's called Craft 3. They were going to put up $1 million of their own funds to keep this thing going. So even in light of that, it still is, it's just been a tough one to kind of get that momentum going.
Don't get 50% match every day.
I don't.
And there are water quality implications because failing septic systems can leak. When I lived in Tillamook County, we had issues on the Wilson River with failing septic systems. Pollutants in the river.
So that was really the cause of the reason kind of primarily for creating this program in the first place. There was a senator from Hughes Bay, Ernie Roebland, and this was actually something that he championed with Senator Michael Dembro, and because they continue to have harmful algal blooms popping up in the Lake District. And so certainly there is that nexus as well for harmful algal blooms.
What's like the qualification to qualify for that program? Like the income level?
I don't off the top of my head. I've got a couple different handouts that lay out all those kind of qualifying factors. And I know at one point we had a grant as well and are still working through getting all those funds out that may have had its own kind of element of qualification. So I can take a look at that.
Those were federal ARPA dollars that were helped us through. And now, all right, what cares? Who cares?
Yeah, they may have been. Okay, so moving on to our next item, the policies investments to promote resource recovery, including renewable energy, nutrient recovery, water resources. Want to mention House Bill 4086, which did pass. This bill is around industrial symbiosis. You'll see that this also appears under our priority on reuse, but this will provide funding for pilot programs, projects across the state to engage in industrial symbiosis work. So really kind of a waste to commodity type of approach of projects of taking waste from one sector or industry that can be reused with another neighboring sector industry. So we do a lot of things here already that match up pretty well with what is being described in the bill. So there's no pilot funding for clean water services or within our region, but we are supportive of the bill, like to see that more jurisdictions are doing these types of projects. All in all, I think is a really good thing. This is where we were partnering with the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure. They had taken a number of policymakers and individuals on these trips to Denmark to take a look at their industrial symbiosis work that they've done out there. And there's some really good work that's happening in the state of Washington as well. So Oregon's kind of trying to elevate, our engagement in that area. The bill also requires the Business Oregon to develop a roadmap on industrial symbiosis to help more communities that are looking to engage in these types of projects.
Someone give me an example of how this works.
So for an example, you may have neighboring businesses, one that's creating a byproduct. Again, in some of our ways, I look at the recovery of nutrients and the fertilizer products that we're creating. And if we're able then to provide those to a farmer that needs that, and it's trying to find those relationships in those areas where there's a need for using something that could otherwise be a waste product. So
example on the coast with fisher people.
there was, yes, yeah, there was, I can't remember what they actually call it, the whole fish or something.
Using some of the parts of the fish that they weren't otherwise going to be selling, and then having a second use for those. And I forget if it was fertilizer or some of. Yeah. So eliminating waste also, right?
Anything to add to that, or I know you were.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that. We have a couple examples that we've actually done. Trees who have had a waste product that they either were trucking away in a different area. And we're working with them to bring that into our facility to create biogas. It's almost engines in between. That direct connection from what they had trucked away for waste. So there's a few items.
Okay, so I already mentioned that priority also kind of fits under our reuse priority as well. So recycled water certainly fits within the model that they're taking a look at. Next priority on that list is around DEQ funding. So again, just making sure that we see sufficient funding and service levels for the water quality permitting program. Going into the legislative session, knowing that we were looking at budget challenges, that was a really significant priority item for us to make sure that we didn't see further cuts to that program that would impact service levels and the ability to get quality permits out the door. At one point, Oregon was one of the worst in the nation for getting permits issued timely for NPDES permits. Those are the big permits, the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permits that we are subject to at our facilities. We are really happy that we did not see any significant cuts to that budget. Everything that was put forward was really around vacancy savings for the agency. So looking at existing vacancies, holding them open a little bit longer to realize the cost savings associated with holding positions open. So we didn't see anything that was more significant than that. Certainly a delay that you see from delaying the hiring of certain positions. One position that we'll talk about is around, there are a couple of positions that were authorized last legislative session around stormwater and funding to create a statewide stormwater manual. And those were on that list of holding those open a bit longer. The governor's office has signaled to DEQ that they should now move forward with those hirings, that's a big priority item for the governor in terms of housing production. House Bill 4019, 4020, and 4021. Those were a package of bills that were put forward by Representative Ben Bowman, who is from the Tigard area, and he's the House Democratic leader, around state agency permitting processes. I will say this legislative session being a short one with not that many bills, we talked a lot about permitting, and that is very rare we've been engaged in many years of conversation around the importance of, efficient, effective permitting for DEQ, most specifically, and really looking for kind of the scraps in terms of state budget to invest in quality permitting programs. And it seems like we have a legislature that's really interested in figuring out how do we make state permitting work better, faster, more efficient, streamlined. I think really the motivation there is around economic development and housing, but we'll take it. We'll use that and say, okay, let's talk about water quality permitting going into the next legislative session. But this package of bills, one of them did not pass, two of them did, but really ultimately what we ended up with was clarification on notice requirements for rulemaking, making sure that there's advance notice or adequate notice for implementation of new rules or changed rules. At one point, there was conversation around more stringent implementation dates for rulemaking on a quarterly basis. That did not move forward. We were not excited about that one, so we were kind of glad to see that the bills are relatively, I think, minor in terms of big policy changes and the impacts they'll have to the state agencies. I think what we're looking for is agencies that are already underfunded and being given additional work. That is a huge concern for us. So the other piece that's in those bills is if they do deny an application, they need to cite why they did it, why they denied it, and the process for appealing that decision. House Bill 4073 was another bill that was in the House Rules Committee, so kind of sat there throughout the whole session. It did have a hearing. I think probably would have resulted in additional litigation, but was kind of in that similar focus of just how do we streamline state agency permitting, make it faster, more efficient. So House Bill,
I'm gonna jump in and just say, if anyone wants to really dig in deeper, if you go online onto this CWAC page of our website, and the PowerPoint is there and with all the materials, and those are hyperlinked.
All right.
So you can click directly on them, or you can use the Oregon Legislative Information System. But if you want to access them and dig in deeper, all the bills listed are hyperlinked.
oh lady, it's fascinating. State permitting. It's so important though. I really will say that. House Bill 4084, Joint Permitting Council. This was a governor priority item. Really more around economic development. So looking to streamline permitting when there is a threshold of capital investment being made in the state. So getting kind of your more typical permitting agencies, DSL, DEQ, et cetera, together to expedite that permitting process and be responsive to economic development opportunities. Also within this, there's some changes to enterprise zone incentives, including a pause, if you will, on incentives for data centers. We'll talk a little bit more about data centers in a bit. So House Bill 4102, DEQ Receipts Authority. This is a bill that we watched really closely. There was a similar bill last legislative session. DEQ already has Receipts Authority, which is essentially allowing an applicant to come in, pay a fee to expedite the process associated with whatever permitting they're looking to get through. There are some arguments, does that create some inequities in the system for those that can't pay that fee? But really, I think it's reflective of that the agency just doesn't have enough resource to get all their work done. So this would allow also the hiring of third parties to help applicants get through the permitting process more efficiently, ideally. So to be very honest, it may be something that we look at and talk to DEQ about for a couple items that we know are going to be heavy lifts for the agency that we need to get done. Preserving local infrastructure financing tools. There really wasn't any legislation specific to system development charges, which is usually what I see when we're talking about this priority item. There will be some rulemaking that starts in August. That is implementation of House Bill, oh my goodness, 2138, I believe. Let me double check. 2138, yes. That was passed in 2025 session. That was a pretty comprehensive bill around housing production. It did have some language in there around model SDCs. So there'll be ongoing work that's done by the agency to implement that legislation, and we'll be tracking that rulemaking process. On emerging contaminants, that's that second item on the list. There was no PFAS related legislation in 2026. We do expect that in 2027, we will see some. We've already had some conversations with legislators that are looking at potential options, mainly around product phase out types of things and looking at products that contain PFAS as and trying to set some limits requirements around that. The PFAS biosolids study is still in progress. That was from a bill that was passed last legislative session in 2025. So providing funding to DEQ and Oregon State University to study biosolids and understand kind of the occurrence, fate, transport of PFAS in land applied biosolids. So we'll continue to monitor that work that's being done. Around our priority for utility responsiveness, efficiency, resiliency, and elevating water workforce needs, pretty broad one overall. There are a couple items I wanted to note. We're really excited to see passage of House Bill 4005, establishing a Water Professionals Appreciation Week every year in October. Just a really good opportunity to bring more awareness to the important work that is being done at utilities like Clean Water Services, because it's not something that people think about every day. And with that awareness comes, I think, better opportunity to have conversations around our water workforce and the needs that we see in investing in that workforce and programs that are going to bring more operators into, you know, and reaching out to high schools, letting them know about career pathways in this field. So
this includes not just clean water, but also water supply.
yes, this would be all water. So all water professionals, largely focused on municipal, I think, but honestly, it didn't limit to municipal either. So you could have wastewater, stormwater, drinking water, could be public-private, but
Hasn't been done before. Has been done somewhere else.
California did this actually. So this was largely modeled after legislation passed in California. And they've got a really great toolkit online, you know, encouraging people to do more tours during that week and doing outreach with the public.
Houses.
I'm sorry?
Open houses.
Open houses, yeah, you name it. So it's a great time for celebrating the people that do the work that keeps us all healthy and keeps our environment safe. So House Bill 4005 around cybersecurity, we're definitely seeing a lot more conversation and policy, not surprisingly, around cybersecurity, including for water utilities. So we did engage in that bill. It will be back next legislative session. It did have some challenges with the timelines in terms of reporting of cybersecurity incidents. Really didn't allow local government to be done with the crisis part of it before they needed to do some pretty serious reporting to the state. So they're going to try and fix that. House Bill 4134, state lodging tax increase for wildlife stewardship, conservation, invasive species work, which is great news. And then Senate Bill 1517, I know that's really great news as well, if you want to mention, yeah.
Yeah, just briefly, that for us, it helps us get people out onto the river safely and doing restoration work. It had pretty broad bipartisan support with opposition from one very specific group. And it was an interesting bedfellows, but really happy it passed. I think it's pretty important for the state.
It does have that language in there around protections for environmental restoration and maintenance activities.
Which is great. That came in near the end.
Okay, and then around housing production, not a ton that we were really tracking that was impactful from the perspective of Clean Water Services. They did reopen a bill, House Bill 4035, that was prior legislation around one-time urban growth boundary expansions, kind of making that more flexible and usable for cities. And then there was a housing omnibus bill as well. And again, ultimately, nothing hugely impactful in terms of where we look for things related to stormwater or SDCs. Other noteworthy bills, because we're so short on time, I won't go into a lot of detail on these other than to say they're hyperlinked. None of these bills passed. They were all ones that we were watching closely through the session as well, though. And I'm sure most people are aware that the economic development bill did not pass because there was a lot of news around that one. So emerging state issues, just to mention, so in January, the governor appointed a data center advisory commission that is meeting regularly. They're meeting once a month right now, to help develop recommendations about how the state should approach data centers in general. And obviously there's a lot of media around this issue. It's pretty, I feel like every week, like it comes up in 5 different ways that I didn't even see coming. But this group is really tackling kind of topic by topic. So they had a more general first meeting. They'll be doing a meeting on energy. Their March meeting was fully focused on water. They're really long meetings. They last from like 9 till 3:30 in the afternoon. So they really do dive pretty deep. They will be putting together their final recommendations by the end of July. So again, we'll be looking to see things that could possibly come out as executive orders from the governor's office or legislation for the next session. So we're watching that closely. From housing and water quality permits, I want to mention, I already mentioned actually the state stormwater manual that is a priority item for the governor's office and that was funded last legislative session, and then just got that go ahead again for DEQ to hire some stormwater positions to develop that manual. We'll be engaged in that process to make sure that it doesn't actually create more challenges. You know, sometimes one size fits all actually makes things a little harder. And then we'll be coordinating kind of with our partner associations. I will also note that the White House just put out an executive order in March around housing production as well that touches on stormwater. So another piece that we'll be watching pretty closely. Federal legislative update.
When you go to federal, can I ask you a related question? So there are some what's happening in the state levels. Now, been here a while and so how will you start to establish all these? One of them on the ballot. She wins, but
I'm still in denial about Ken Holmes, so I'm not ready to fully embrace that yet because he has been fantastic. And you just don't see people that really dive into water policy like he has. Luckily, one thing that he did do, which I think will be helpful, is establish an Oregon Legislative Water Caucus. And that's got about 30 members in it, and they meet regularly and they are learning and trying to up their water IQ. And so we engage with that group. They have a chief of staff that they've hired for the water caucus now, which is great. So I think he's going to left this legacy to try and get more legislators interested and invested in water issues. So yeah, we'll have to be doing, you know, that outreach and education with any newly electeds in our district and working through kind of that caucus to be determined about who will chair the committee that he chaired. So it was a bipartisan chaired committee of Representative Mark Owens from Eastern Oregon and Ken Helms. So we'll see what happens with that. They continue with that sharing of the gavel. It'll be a year of change though. It's always tough.
I think you guys are really close to.
Yeah, it will work again.
This long stretch between the short session and the next long session is also a good opportunity for tours, to encourage folks to take that little bit of extra time, if they're not really busy campaigning, to come out and just learn about water, go to the source. So we try and use that as well.
General manager.
Yeah, I will. There's a lot of onboarding that's coming up.
Much onboarding. Yeah. Yes, I will breeze through this one. Bureau of Land Management, we're watching. There's some scoping going on right now around the Northwestern and Coastal Oregon Resource Management plans. It's really about timber harvest, increasing the amount of harvesting of timber. So we're watching just to understand what that could look like from a water quality impact. There'll be a lot of work that needs to kind of go into that process. So we'll keep you posted. PFAS liability protection, that legislation that there's a couple of bills really that we've been watching. This is around CERCLA really at the federal level and who has liability for cleanup associated with hazardous substances, and PFAS being listed. PFAS and PFOA are both listed. They had a hearing in November, and then they actually had another one in December on an exemption for water utility providers. So that continues to be something debated at the federal level. Good news on the Wipes Act. The bill passed, so this is around labeling of, I'll air quote it, flushable wipes, to say do not flush on them. We had legislation that passed in Oregon back in 2021 that requires that labeling. So this would be federal, which is great from an enforcement perspective and just having everyone be playing by the same rules. The bill passed the House, and then the Senate bill, which was actually sponsored by Senator Jeff Merkley from Oregon, just passed March 22nd, I think, in the Senate. So now goes over to the House. So it seems very likely at this point that we're going to see that legislation advance, which is great news. I'm going to skip over the Permitting Regulatory Reform Act because it passed the House. It's in the Senate, where I think it's probably going to sit quite some time. So I don't think it's an urgent one to talk through. And then some from the State Revolving Fund reauthorization. So this is a Clean Water State Revolving Fund, Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, really critical infrastructure funding sources. They kind of continue to go through this phase where they're not receiving a lot of funding through the administration, through, the budget process from the president. And then ultimately they've been ending up okay. So there were bills passed in January through the budget bills for FY26, where that funding was essentially restored at a relatively sustainable level. We just saw again in the recently released president's budget that they were zeroed out again in that budget, but I don't anticipate Congress is going to follow suit. So I'm not highly concerned that we'll see a decrease in that funding. Scoggins, we'll be very quick in this, other than to say you've received the update that Reclamation kind of stopped the project as it was, which was the larger, more comprehensive dam safety project in April of last year. They have been working since that time to advance a project that focuses on the spillway, which is the most vulnerable aspect of the facility in an earthquake. And so we have been seeing some good progress that has been made by Bureau of Reclamation, and I think encouraging that they are really looking to advance a structural project to address seismic risk. In January, Congress also, through the approval of the FY26 Energy and Water Appropriations Bill, included $1 million specifically for the Bureau of Reclamation to continue to do the work on Scoggins for a structural solution and project. That was supported by our federal delegation, but largely secured by Senator Jeff Merkley, and included that report language as well in the bill that really speaks to the need for a structural solution and to be able to withstand a 2,500-year event. Since that time, we had a meeting with Bureau of Reclamation in February. I hadn't heard from them for a little bit. So it was really nice that they got everyone back together and really provided some clarity, including an updated timeline for construction. As you can imagine, the delays that we've seen as they try and figure out how to move to a scaled back project have caused delays in construction timeline. So really what we're looking at is construction October 2034 to 2039. So kind of continues to push back. But again, ultimately, where we've been concerned about whether or not they would really be working to advance a structural solution, it feels like there's really good progress that I think is being made there. And we just saw a release of the president's budget as well, and Reclamation's got specific funding, about $8.5 million in there for continuing this work, which is good news. Here we go. Any questions? Because I'm 1 minute over. Landed the plane.
Any questions online? Mark?
The permitting council that's set up, and that there may be projects that exceed the value that triggers that work within the footprint. Is there any role for CWS to play in helping to offer some suggestions on how they can improve their permitting efficiency?
Great question. Not as included in the legislation. That's not to say that we can't maybe be thinking about that where there's industrial lands that may be involved, but nothing in the bill spoke to local permitting processes. So it kind of need to be where state, it's local potentially, but certainly something to think through and look at as we're continuing to talk about industrial opportunity. It's a good question.
Thank you. All right, our final item, Jamie and Peter will share the updated climate action strategic roadmap.
I'm Jamie Welts. I am the corporate development manager. One of the projects I'm working on, programs I'm working on, is the climate action strategic roadmap.
I'm Peter Shower, Research and Innovation. I agree to address some projects that we're discussing.
So tonight we're going to give you a little bit of background about the strategic roadmap, where we're at, how we're moving towards implementation, and the next steps. So I actually came to this group about 2.5 years ago when I first started, and we had a climate roadmap that was created in the spring of 2023. And so when I started, I inherited the program and the roadmap. And it was the first, we've been doing climate work for a really long time here, but it was the first time that we had really captured in a way the strategy. And it was really a list of projects that we were doing or were hoping to do that related to climate. And it was created by a group that had started before I arrived. When I started in fall of 2023, we chartered the strategic roadmap steering committee. We had a small committee that was interested staff members who really cared about climate who had come together. And so we realized that we were missing some people and key stakeholders at the table. So we brought together more groups, representation from more groups. And one of the things that they had asked is to get a little bit more clarity and directionality from the plan. The original plan was a great capturing of a lot of the climate work that we were doing, and again, wanted to do, but it really kind of lacked a clear strategic vision and like directionality. So after, in about 2024, we embarked on a process to refine the original roadmap. And that goal was to really clarify the language and simplify in a way so that we understood where we were heading around climate. And we really worked or capitalized on all of the expertise and knowledge we had in clean water services. And we had also had the opportunity, there's a stakeholder survey that we conduct through our community, my acronyms at the end of the day is really CCE, Communications and Community Engagement group. They conduct a community survey with key stakeholders every other year. And so we added some climate questions to that, and that helped inform the direction that we went with the update. And we wanted to make sure that we weren't losing all of the previous work and research that had been done. So all of that combined, we came up with our revised climate action strategic roadmap. And it really, what we wanted to do is all of this work that's being done across the organization, we wanted to really create a directionality for that. So we've created 2 primary goals. The first one is climate mitigation. How are we reducing our impact through reducing our greenhouse gas emissions? And then adaptation. How are we preparing for the inevitable impacts of climate change that is happening. So we wanted to really simplify, which really just when I look at how do we simplify and clarify, that means we get really focused and razor sharp on what it is that we're trying to achieve and where we're headed. And so we worked through that and we came up with the plan, which you have, or it's not a plan, sorry, it's the roadmap, which I think you all have received a copy of. And the first goal is really focused on mitigation. And again, like mitigation and adaptation are not mutually exclusive. There is some overlap in Venn diagram, but for being clear around how we were creating this roadmap, we created our mitigation goal, how we were going to be reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and increase carbon sequestration. So we have 5 strategies that fall within that. And so their strategies are basically like, what are we trying to achieve? And there can be multiple projects that will be happening across the district to help us achieve those strategies. So they include getting an understanding of our baseline emissions. We have that started, but it's has opportunity for improving. Once we understand where our emissions are coming from and the magnitude of that, we can set our targets for reduction, which will help with prioritization and planning. We want to audit and upgrade energy systems where feasible, implement renewable energy alternatives, and then invest in systems to sequester carbon. So these are all strategies that we are looking at. How do we implement across the organizations that when people in different groups are working on projects, they have this lens of climate as they're working through bringing on new projects or working through existing projects.
So that list of strategies, and I'd like to go back just for a second to the original plan. Oh, yeah, keep it on the next slide. But back to the original work that was put together, that was consolidating a lot of stuff that happened around the district that might have just tangentially been impacted by resiliency to climate change, or items that we were making decisions on that would have climate change impact. So they were pretty much all across the board on how we were considering it. So one of the first things as we go forward, if we're trying to consider mitigation, is, well, what are we even doing today? Before we can talk about improving, we want to understand fully what is the impact of clean water services today. And we had done an original evaluation several years ago that was using just general emission factors, general information like number of people, pounds of BOD or things like that coming into the facility, and gave us a general idea, but it wasn't really enough to make a decision and say, okay, well, what do we want to improve? What do we want to invest on? So this next step, before we can really invest time in setting a goal or anything like that, or even talking about what that goal should be, is getting into that much more deeply. Taking a good look at where it makes sense to dig in more deeply. Can we just use the general emissions factors for certain areas? Can we actually do site-specific work so we understand what our impact is around? So that is a kind of baseline that starting this program has really allowed us to do, is to set a lens so it's not a lot of different groups all kind of trying to improve things, but not understanding the whole story of what the relative contributions that they're making to it. There are a lot of things that people have done within the organization. I don't want to downplay some of the work that is done. We'll touch upon that further on in the presentation here. But that is one of those first goals that came out here is, okay, we need to systematically look at that mitigation as well as the resilience on the next slide.
So then the second goal focus that we're heading in is adaptation. How do we prepare, respond, and build the resiliency of our infrastructure, given the prediction, given currently what we're seeing, and then the future predictions of what we anticipate in terms of some climate impacts. And so there's 7 strategies under this particular goal, which includes the first one that we're prioritizing is looking at a risk and vulnerability study. So if we know what we're predicting in terms of rainfall, how are we then planning to make sure that our infrastructure withstands any changes in rainfall that we might see? Making sure that we're using a climate lens when we're revising regulatory requirements and policies, that we're prioritizing infrastructure upgrades. Again, that's using the vulnerability study to help inform some of these later strategies. And then some of these are focused on our people, protecting our staff. There's a connection we have with the natural hazard mitigation plan. So there's some overlap there. We want to build resilient ecosystems. Collaboration with our regional partners is really important. Like, for example, I'm pointing to Sherry Lynn because we just met with their new climate program manager. Some of the items in the plan for Tualatin intersect and require partnership with us. So we're connected with Washington County, Partners for Sustainable Washington County Communities, to make sure that we're in alignment with the other regional plans and that we're all talking together. And then just to continue to collect data to inform the climate work, which includes engaging in those surveys when they come due on our survey cycle. So those are the overarching strategies to help us achieve our second goal in the
Pardon me for interrupting. But I'm still trying to make a connection between water services and in-house and how much or what is that overlap that impacts clean water services from activity?
Are you speaking specifically to the adaptation portion or
Climate action, climate roadmap and everything? How much of it really is going to affect clean water services? For example, I can understand more rain, you'll have more problems. Listen, but that's a small. So the entire clean water services activity is it?
It is a fundamental piece though that impacts a lot of things coming around. We jump into the next slide. Maybe this gets at some of the questions, because one of the things from a planning perspective, all the work that we do, we are planning for what is coming for the future. What talked about it at the beginning of this meeting, trying to talk about what our design storms are, decides how we design certain items, especially related to stormwater. These have large impacts throughout throughout our planning, and we every 5 years, whatever period to see makes sense for our master planning efforts for CIP at each of the treatment plants, are using projections on where we think we'll be from a growth perspective, but also on what we think our peaking factors are. So those peaking factors drive a lot of the work that we do on how we schedule different projects and how we plan for that expand and build out. And in previous iterations, it's been talked to, I think, the idea of, well, climate change, things are going to get more dramatic. I mean, we almost at that level, it's going to get more dramatic. So we need to add in a safety factor to that. So one of the things that is important to us is to really understand we have these forecasts. There are forecasts out there for what is a climate change predicted to be. And it's pretty granular. It's pretty darn good. It's not quite to the granularity that we need within clean water services to understand how these changes will impact us. So we've been doing climate downscaling, climate projection downscaling information to take that information and not just from the precipitation rates, but temperature, humidity, cloud cover, like and those items. It will all help us design. I mean, gosh, I hope we're not talking something too dramatic, but differences to our our design storms for the facilities, design storms for stormwater abatement that are going to impact us. But it doesn't just stop there. Our understanding of how these things are going to change impact our receiving stream. And we've done a heck of a job modeling the Tualatin River, a lot to do with our phosphorus needs, other algal needs that we've done within the river. all of this climate data is gonna impact that temperature of the receiving stream. It's gonna impact what we expect we're gonna have in the future. Mixing zones, how much fish passage and impacts from all of this data. So that's why we focused on how can we get a better idea of changes, predictions in climate change coming forward, how that's gonna impact a lot of our infrastructure, our ability to treat water. And did I?
Yeah.
The second one that we have gets at, once we do have the impacts or to the treatment, things like that, design storms, we also need to look at what's the impact to just the survivability of pipes or pump side, flood elevations that we expect. I mean, that is one of the first things that we need to know when you plan around putting in a piece of equipment. How do we stay above a certain flood stage elevation? How do we protect our investments? How do we make sure that service continues despite a changing climate? So that's the lens to which most of this is being brought in. Instead of using general, we figure it's going to get worse, we're trying to be able to adapt to the best information we can get from some of these predictions, from some of those climate predictions nationally that are being done, being able to apply this methodology that we're developing, be able to apply that to what's at the plan. Maybe hit on half of what you were asking.
You're giving me a lot of ideas, but in my mind, it was still going to be, maybe he has a bigger problem with this than services. Of course, it does impact us, and take a little while for me to absorb all of what you said. Thank you.
And I think that is part of why we needed this program to start collecting all this information. I've been with Clean Water Services for 14 years, and remember at the beginning we were almost scratching our heads of, well, what might happen. And it was almost directional arrows, like might get hotter, flow might go down in the summer. I mean, we're trying to come to grips with how can we consistently look at and really these risks that we see coming down. So we're learning.
One more question on this topic. Aren't there other organizations, governmental and others, who are more focused on this? EQ, NOAA, they're more involved in this kind of data collection and
We found that we can get the projections from some of these other organizations. TQ isn't necessarily playing in that realm, but a lot of the climate projections are being created, but they just kind of consider, hey, there's a point that I forget how many miles, like their grid that they project is pretty darn widespread. And based on our actual peaking flows that we see throughout the system, doesn't give the granularity of how these impacts could impact, how we would see that impact our design system. So we have to go to a downscale. So other utilities have considered similar options. We have a little bit unique because of the topography around here that we're trying to take account for creating these projections, but they're considering these same ideas of how those nationally developed climate projections are impacting the facility. That's facility specific. So that's what we're focused.
I might jump in on because I'm going to use that photo that's on the screen here. So that's our friend James that's out at our farm facility. At that facility, we are raising plants for our climate adapted plant materials. Yeah, jumping ahead. The photo doesn't go with that, so I'm gonna use it. So we've come and talked to this group about Emerald Ash Borer, and how are we gonna plan for all the ash trees dying off, and how are we gonna make sure that we have shade cover, because heat is a regulated process, right? So we need to have a thermal management plan, and shade cover is part of that. Well, as the climate warms, we need to figure out what plants are going to survive in sort of new climate that is moving northward faster than plants themselves can naturally live. And so we are undergoing a many years long effort to determine what species are going to have the best survival rate in the region, because it is critical for us to understand that as part of our permit compliance, to make sure that we can continue to have vegetated shade covering the river and the tributaries. So that's a green infrastructure example of what we're thinking about when it comes to climate, and some of the science that supports it.
Thank you for your indulgence and your patience with me. Thank you.
I want to talk more, but it's late. I don't want to see you guys.
And there was a question on mitigation. Is there a timeline for the 5 steps on that slide? We didn't put a specific timeframe on this plan. So there is not. You know, we're moving into the implementation phase, which is going to get a little bit more specificity of our, like, the flow and the timing and the accountability of this, but we did not intentionally put time frame on this. Yeah, advance this slide.
Interesting. The next call was interesting to hear more about the fingertips method. Yeah.
Yeah, so a few things to put in there, because I hate to say, like, hey, we're just doing one thing related to it, and that's the only area in which Clean Water Services does consider mitigation on what we do. There's a lot of projects and a couple of large ones that we want to highlight. There's upcoming renewable natural gas. I just briefly mentioned the idea that we're creating natural gas essentially from our anaerobic digesters here. We've done a great job in the past. We've used it to that gas for cogeneration, creating electricity, and also using it to heat spaces around the facilities. At our Rock Creek facility, we're looking to actually create renewable natural gas RNG that has credits actually associated with it. These RIN credits that have large value to them. So we are in the process of trying to bring that to fruition in the next 2 years. I think it's the end of 2028 that we're anticipating will be online. We're currently in the pre-selection of equipment phase, working through that so that we can have full ownership with this. Has been probably maybe brought up to this group in the past, the idea of RNG. We have taken an approach this time around of actually owning and operating it. And once we get to a point of commissioning, that's when some of the agreements with Northwest Natural or whoever the procurer of the gas and the credits will set up a system for that. There's a number of different ways. I don't understand them all, but we're trying to evaluate what is the best way to go forward. So we are also considering these impacts throughout a lot of these large projects that we have here, and not just flaring. There's also ongoing, this one's a little more on the researchy side, but it is because of certain operations that we have in our aeration basins. One of the heart, essentially, of the wastewater treatment process is biological process that can create some of these greenhouse gas emissions. And because of our relationships with a number of other either utilities and consultants, we got brought in on actually a couple of different water work research foundation projects to help evaluate maybe how our operation, we could limit this, how our impacts could sort of, how we operate the facility could limit our impacts from the greenhouse gas perspective. And so we're able to leverage these types of research projects that are funded through WRF to bring in this expertise to help us understand and make our own decisions. And a last one on a purely economical basis, and that's where a lot of these things come in. Like it helps to have the lens of the greenhouse gases, but a lot of things make just economic sense. We use alkalinity to control our pH, alkalinity adjustment in our facilities to control pH, and we've used hydrated lime for a long time. We've switched over, I'm sorry, I'm getting too far ahead of myself. I'm just assuming it's going to be perfect and everything's going to work out. But we are in the middle of an evaluation of using micronized ground calcium carbonate that's provided through this Crew Carbon company to be able to use that as our alkalinity supplement. And our main driver is it's going to be a cheaper way for us to get the same amount of output that we had previously done. And so we're working with them, partnering with them to have them test out how well can it work in our system, our existing facilities, our existing receiving tanks and everything else along those lines to just make a good economical decision. And they'll be working on getting the carbon credits associated with this, but we are at mostly a full-scale demonstration of this at our Rock Creek facility at this point. But it will have a large impact, not just on the carbon accounting and getting credit for it, but also it is directly sequestering carbon as we're using this as an alkalinity supplement. And there are a number of other things that we've been involved in for many years. Energy Trust of Oregon has been the driver for a number of our projects that really contributed to efficiency upgrades that we've made around the facilities, using some of the funding for that to either change out pumps, use new processes to equalize inflow and flow and get both monetary benefit and then as well as energy reduction as part of this. So there's a number here. And did want to for time, maybe we can just jump to the next one.
You read a question.
Yes, sorry.
Question, my understanding is buildings and transportation tend to be largest contributors to greenhouse gases. You know, in many cities, etc. It looked like you were not perhaps done yet with doing your inventory of emissions. And after you complete that inventory, will you then also be directing your mitigation at some of those biggest problems where you can get the biggest reductions?
That is step one to doing that next phase. Okay. We want to identify really where on that large pie, where the largest pieces are, and be able to set a goal of what makes sense. And we see this not only just to reduce where we are, but setting a framework so that as we expand, we have capital improvement projects going on all the time. So we're making decisions between different technical alternatives, including this type of greenhouse gas accounting within our decision making is something we need to make more and more robust. We've used triple bottom line analysis in the past, kind of the precursors to what we're talking about here, but we're trying to make it a much more robust and repeatable process so that we're both thinking about mitigating what we're doing and making great decisions.
Thing to kind of double click on is, some of the work with more, some of the science is still being kind of developed to really understand what emissions look like, especially at out of wastewater treatment facility,
Yeah,
right?
because it's a different animal.
It's a different animal, right?
I guess that.
If we're thinking about carbon emissions, that's one thing in kind of day to day. But if you're thinking about the carbon equivalents, methane is far more potent. We have a lot of methane. Nitrous oxide, far more potent than methane. So we have some pieces that are intrinsic in what it takes to treat water and the byproducts that smart folks like Peter and his team are helping to contribute to the overall industry science to understand that better. And so I don't think we necessarily know that buildings and transportation are our biggest. Maybe I'm now
really interesting to see.
Way out over my skis on this. So yeah.
Hi, Sherilyn.
Well, I know time is sensitive, and I don't know how many more slides you have, but I have an overarching question. So maybe it's more relevant when you're open it up for questions, but
Really, we'll just have a couple. We can get through this because Elizabeth stole my thunder and much better than I was going to do. So I love this. I mean, we're doing the ongoing climate change. We've done some work on that already for precipitation and temperature. We're expanding that to include a number of other things, but I wanted to talk about the climate adapted plant material, which is amazing. It's been going on since 2020. I'll just add a couple of quick factoids that are fun. Right now we're in phase 6 of this program, 3 gardens, 35 acres of testing of different plant material at the farm, Fern Hill and Jackson Bottom, that we're doing this testing right now. And that's starting up and is gonna go for 20 years. Like, that is how we're trying to look at this. This is an asset that we, that's part of our thermal mitigation that we're doing. Discharge.
With the SWCD and Metro.
Yes. It's an amazing project, like 20 years. But that data is going to be just worth so much data. We've gotten this far ahead, but I mean, we've got to a point of being at the basics of the project, but need to have this so that 20 years in the future, whenever we see changes in the which plants are actually surviving here, this will make a big difference. So we can jump to the next.
So that leads us to, we have the plan and now we're transitioning. Shouldn't say a plan, we have the roadmap. And what's unique about this is it doesn't have like a full list of projects. The strategies, well, some are maybe projects, the strategies could be multiple projects that are originating not just from our committee, but elsewhere in the organization. And so we're looking at how are we going to implement and operationalize this plan and still stay connected to all of these other projects that are happening outside of this work. So bringing everybody together, looking at criteria for how we are going to analyze and prioritize the projects. Like Peter mentioned, some of them just have monetary benefits, and then the climate is an added benefit. So we're really figuring out what's the decision-making structure of the committee. How are we getting information in? How are we giving information out? And where are we able to make decisions? Where are we making recommendations up to our executive leadership team? So all of that is in process. We've started that process and we're trying to get clear and experiment with how do we actually make sure that, as Peter said, all our arrows are pointing in the same direction that we're heading with the overarching roadmap. So that's all in the works. We've got really great people on the committee, really thoughtful minds. And so we're now to the point where starting to implement in a more not that we haven't been thoughtful, but just maybe in a more coordinated way. So Sherilyn, I didn't know.
Thank you. So, I mean, it sounds like that the climate action roadmap is specific for the organization. I know in Tualatin, ours is a community climate action plan. And so it focuses on community actions. I'm sorry, my cat is now interjecting itself. But so back on slide 6, it said a greenhouse gas inventory. So that is specifically for like facilities associated with clean water services. It's not the district, like companies in the district and transportation in the district. It's focused on, and I have one other question once you answer that.
Yeah, correct. That is correct.
All right, and then on slide 8, number 2 was regulatory requirements. Yes, revised regulatory requirements. So, I mean, if it is an organization-focused climate action roadmap, what regulatory requirements would be? I mean, so those impact like development, right? And so, what's the focus there?
Yeah, I mean, Exhibit A on this is we're updating the design and construction standards, right? And we have to do that because of federal requirements. And also it is directly related to how much water is coming in, how much do we need to, retain and infiltrate. So that is sort of Exhibit A for what the second it's under that strategy.
We also are coming up on our permit renewal, and we have a long-term regulatory compliance roadmap, and Peter represents that. We also have several committee members from different groups across Clean Water Services who are also on the climate steering committee, so we're trying to make sure that we're in alignment with where the permit renewal work is heading, as well as the climate work.
Thank you.
Rebecca has one. Oh, okay.
If you could go back a slide or two, back to mitigation. I think that if there is one takeaway from my time helping to create the Beaverton City Climate Action Plan, it would be the importance of establishing metrics in the plan's actions. I think it might be one more slide back. Regardless, I hope that as you move forward with these plans, you're not only doing baselines and setting targets, but that you're making sure those targets are measurable so that as you move forward, the success and monitoring of the success of the plan and some sort of outward reporting, both outward to the rest of Clean Water Services, but also outward to your partner cities and outward to your clients, for lack of a better word, your ratepayers, that those metrics can be used to either change those targets, move them more aggressively, add targets, add actions, but to hold yourselves accountable to the goals that you're setting. That was a big failure of the first Beaverton City plan as arranged in, I think it was 2020. There were very few numbers attached to actions, and it was nearly impossible to judge whether or not the actions were being taken seriously or if anything was moving in the right direction. That's all for the moment. Thank you.
I don't know if you already have metrics included in one of the sub bullets, but that bears emphasizing what you're saying here, because again, you can have a plan and we're starting off with a good baseline. It's the intention, but gosh, we don't want to look up around 10 years from now and say, we did a bunch of stuff, don't know what it was. So I like data. I like you pushing that.
And that's one of the things that we're focusing on in the committee is we have some metrics in the plan. There are our best thinking at the moment that they might be great metrics, but part of this, since we have research and innovation, is continuous process improvement and learning. And so as we create or as we get into implementation, really looking at per projects, how are we evaluating that is having an impact to help us move towards the goals that we'll set for mitigation.
Other questions? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, for a comment or a suggestion for some attention to be paid externally as well as internally. When you look at this strictly on Clean Water Services operations, there may be missed opportunities for collaboration and partnerships with other entities that can also resolve or advance some of the things that are important in Clean Water Services. And one of my favorite things I like to bring up is looking at communities that may be in older apartment buildings with no insulation, no AC. We do get heat-related deaths every summer in this part of Oregon. There may be possible opportunities for partnering with a city, with somebody like the Soil and Water Conservation District that funds planting projects and community and urban restoration projects to introduce better shading that can intercept rainwater and prevent it from getting so warm, sheet flowing down the street into the stream. Look for those opportunities as well through this process. It's a drum I beat a lot. Everybody on this committee knows that, but just one more time tonight.
Peter, thank you. It's now time for public comment, and so we'll welcome any members of the public who'd like to provide comment. If there's anybody. Here. All right. Well, I'll turn it over to you for announcements.
Okay. Two quick things for me. You all should have received an email with an array of kind of follow-up from our last meeting, and included in that was just a schedule reminder. So we will not have a regular CWAC meeting in May. A lot of other stuff going on, including budget and the DNC subcommittee, so we're still keeping you all busy. But no May CWAC meeting. We will meet in June. That will be the forum that Elaine alluded to. We will not meet in July, and we're going to bring the paddle back in August. So just for folks that are trying to plan their summer, trying to help let you know what the calendar is going to look like. And then last but not least, tomorrow we will be announcing our next general manager. So on Tuesday, the board is set to take action to name and appoint the general manager, but all of those materials are public and they will be live online sometime tomorrow. We're trying to make it tomorrow morning, and we're coordinating with the county for when that post is going to go up. So
Great.
and I will make sure that you all get an email once that information is out.
Yeah. I'm in tomorrow morning prior from me. And my newsletter distribution that you guys get, so we're gonna cover CWAC and our city partners now, so hopefully in the morning. If we text really quickly.
Yeah, what's your?
So a quick question about the schedule.
Yeah.
Seen something about the Dalton River paddling.
Yeah,
Does that happen?
we are, we haven't set a date yet, but we're looking in August.
Before we meet for the next one?
So,
We don't.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't kill.
yeah, okay. We'll try and get it soon.
Looking forward to that
Yeah.
event this year.
Yeah, exactly. Been busy with the recruitment piece, but that's all.
All right,
There's
great.
nothing.
Great. There being no further business, CWAC is adjourned. Next meeting, as everyone's mentioned, is June 10th.
Anyway,
Thanks.
early adjournment.
I know, it's kind of